Let me paint you a picture that should genuinely terrify you. It's negative 15 degrees outside, not, oh, it's a bit nippy cold, not, I should wear a scarf today, cold. The kind of cold that punishes you for being stupid. The kind of cold that finds every gap in your jacket, every crack in your walls, every excuse you made for not preparing. The kind that kills. Your furnace just quit. Doesn't matter why. Broken part, empty fuel tank, no power, a squirrel chewed through the wrong wire. Doesn't matter. The thing that keeps you alive stopped working. And the power grid? Gone. Has been for 3 days. Nobody's saying when it's coming back because nobody actually knows. The utility company is overwhelmed, the repair crews are spread thin, and your house is hemorrhaging warmth by the hour. Now look out your window. What your neighbors are doing exactly what panicked people do. They're wearing 6 layers of clothing inside their own homes. Some are feeding furniture into fireplaces because they ran out of wood. Others are throwing bags into cars and driving toward relatives who, odds are, don't have heat either. Everyone looks desperate. Everyone is making noise, burning through resources, scrambling. Except for one house on your street has a light on. A small, simple structure, nothing fancy, nothing expensive, nothing you'd call impressive. And inside that house, a man is walking around in a t-shirt, not bundled up, not shivering, not rationing body heat like it's a precious commodity, just comfortable, warm, going about his business while everyone around him unravels. What does that man know that everyone else missed? Well, his name was Robert McNamara. He was a carpenter. He lived in rural Vermont in 1957, and what he built, almost accidentally out of cheap surplus parts and an old stone foundation, stayed at a steady 70 degrees Fahrenheit while the outside air hit 15 below zero. No furnace, no modern heating system, no electricity needed. His neighbors were fighting tooth and nail just to keep their homes at 50 degrees. 50, that's barely above pipe burst territory. That's the children sleep in coats territory. That's survivable but miserable. And Robert was walking around in a t-shirt. Today we're going to break down exactly what he did, why it worked, and what you can actually do about it right now. Because the physics behind this are so straightforward, so logical. Plus that the real question isn't, why didn't anyone think of this? The real question is, why did we ever stop? Let's get into it. Vermont in 1957, a cold that put everything on trial. Rural Vermont winters in the 1950s didn't mess around. Rutland, Vermont, the kind of town where everyone knows everyone else's business, was dealing with a brutal stretch of cold that winter. Coal rationing was in effect. Firewood was expensive and running short. Most homes relied on heating systems that were, by any honest standard, pretty primitive compared to what we'd expect today. And yet somehow what they had back then was still better in one critical way. People hadn't gotten cocky about it yet. They hadn't started assuming the infrastructure would always work. They hadn't built their entire survival strategy around a single point of failure, but a lot of them had, because when that cold rolled in hard, sustained 15 below zero, not just a night or two, but days on end, homes were struggling to maintain 50 degrees inside, kids sleeping under every blanket in the house, ice forming on the interior side of windows, not the exterior, and adults wearing coats indoors, not as a quirky lifestyle choice, because they had to. That was reality. That was normal. Robert McNamara wasn't living in that reality. He'd built something that his neighbors looked at with barely concealed pity. A surplus military Quonset hut, those curved corrugated metal structures the U.S. military used to house soldiers in places ranging from Alaskan bases to Pacific Islands, sitting on top of an old stone basement. The basement itself was a relic, the foundation of a farmhouse that burned to the ground sometime in the 1890s. Thick stone walls built by people who expected their work to outlast them by generations. From the outside, it looked like something a desperate person built because they ran out of better options. And maybe that's what it was. But when the cold came, real, serious, this will kill you if you're unprepared cold, Robert's little structure stayed at 70 degrees. His neighbors weren't just uncomfortable. Some were in genuine trouble. And Robert was fine. That contrast isn't a fun historical anecdote. It's a lesson that modern construction has almost completely forgotten, and that forgetting is going to cost people their lives during the next serious grid failure, which for the record is not a question of if, it's when. Look, why your house is a thermal disaster. Don't take it personally, but do take it seriously. Before we talk about what Robert did right, let's be honest about what modern construction does wrong. Because understanding the failure is the only way to understand the fix. Your walls store almost nothing. Standard modern home construction, wood frame, fiberglass bats, drywall, gives you maybe R13 to R19 insulation value. That sounds like something. It's not nothing. But what it almost entirely lacks is thermal mass. Thermal mass is the capacity to store heat energy, to soak it up and hold it and release it slowly over time. Your walls heat up fast, cool down fast, and store basically nothing. The moment your furnace stops, heat starts escaping and it doesn't stop. You're not heating a house, you're filling a leaky bucket. With it, your floor is betraying you constantly. The ground beneath your home sits at a remarkably consistent 50 to 55 degrees Fahrenheit year-round. If you're heating your home to 70 degrees, that's a 15 to 20 degree differential right there at your foundation. Heat moves toward cold, it always does. So your heated air is continuously being pulled downward through your floor into the earth beneath you. Modern construction treats the ground as something to build on top of, rather than something to work with. That's a mistake. Your house is designed to leak air. This one sounds insane, but it's true. For reasons related to air quality and building codes and ventilation standards, your house intentionally exchanges interior air with exterior air on a regular basis. While every cubic foot of warm air that leaves has to be replaced by cold air that needs to be heated, you are running a heating system against a constant built-in deficit. Your entire heating setup is one failure away from nothing. One furnace, one fuel source, one electrical connection, one set of pipes. Any single component fails, and your home goes from comfortable to dangerously cold within hours, not days. Modern homes are not resilient, they're dependent. They require continuous energy input to maintain even basic habitability. Interrupt that input and the system collapses immediately. Robert's shelter operated on the opposite logic. Instead of generating heat constantly to compensate for constant loss, it was designed to retain heat it already had. Completely different problem, completely different solution. A quick pause. If this is useful to you, do me a favor and hit like, drop a comment telling me your home's single biggest thermal weakness, and subscribe if you haven't already. It costs you nothing and it helps more people find this information before they actually need it. The Quonset hut on the stone foundation, why it was accidentally brilliant. Robert wasn't trying to revolutionize anything. He was a carpenter who wanted cheap housing. He found a surplus Quonset hut for $300 from government surplus. These things were everywhere after World War II. The military had used them for everything and was now offloading them cheap. He found an old stone foundation that was just sitting there on a property outside of town, and he put one on top of the other. That's it. That's the whole story of how it was built. But what he accidentally created was a thermodynamically superior shelter because of three things: the thermal mass of those stone walls, the earth coupling of the partially underground basement, and the insulated envelope he created inside the Quonset hut shell. The stone walls as a heat battery. Those stone walls weren't just walls, they were storage. Stone has thermal mass, the capacity to absorb heat and hold it. During the day, any heat source at all, a small fire, body heat, sunlight coming through windows, got slowly absorbed into those thick stone walls. 2 feet of stone, holding heat like a sponge. Then at night, when the outside temperature dropped and the fire wasn't burning, those walls released that stored heat back into the living space. Not all at once, slowly, steadily, over hours. Well, the shelter wasn't burning fuel and immediately losing the resulting heat. It was charging up like a battery and slowly discharging. That's an entirely different operating principle, and it's why Robert needed such a small wood stove to maintain such a large temperature advantage over the outside air. Earth is the great stabilizer. The basement, being partially underground, wasn't an accident or a compromise. It turned out to be the single most important thermal feature of the whole structure. The earth at depth doesn't care what season it is. It doesn't swing between 80 degrees in summer and 15 below in winter like the surface air does. It stays at 50 to 55 degrees. Constant, stable, free. Robert's shelter was thermally connected to that stability. In winter, when outside air was brutally cold, whereas the surrounding earth was still 50+ degrees. The earth wasn't pulling heat out of the shelter. It was, in a real sense, adding warmth relative to the air. The shelter wasn't fighting two fronts. It was only fighting the air above grade, and the stone walls and insulated roof were handling that. In summer, flip it. Earth at 50 degrees is cooler than 80-degree outside air. The same feature that keeps the shelter warm in winter keeps it cool in summer. Passive, no mechanical intervention required. The insulated envelope, the Quonset hut's corrugated metal shell, taken on its own, is a thermal nightmare. Metal conducts heat rapidly and provides almost no insulation. Robert knew this, so he lined the interior with everything he could get his hands on. Old wool blankets, fiberglass batting, newspaper and cardboard packed into every gap. This created a substantial insulated barrier between the cold metal exterior and the living space in it. The metal shed rain and snow. The improvised insulation kept the warmth in. Together they worked. The result was a shelter that could maintain 70 degrees in extreme cold using a modest cast iron wood stove, burning a fraction of the fuel his neighbors went through, trying to maintain 50 degrees in their conventional homes. By accident, Robert had built around physics instead of fighting it. The numbers behind the magic, why this actually works. Let's get into the science briefly, because understanding it is what lets you apply it to your own situation, rather than just admiring Robert's story from a distance. Thermal mass math. Stone carries a thermal mass of roughly 0.2 British thermal units per pound per degree Fahrenheit of temperature change. Robert's stone basement walls contain somewhere in the neighborhood of 50,000 pounds of stone. Thick walls, a lot of square footage. Run the math, that's 10,000 BTUSE of heat storage per degree of temperature. Heating those walls from a ground-stable 50 degrees up to 70 degrees costs 200,000 BTUSE of energy. That's a real investment. But once made, those walls hold 200,000 BTUS that they will slowly release back into the space as temperatures try to drop. That's hours of warmth with no fire burning at all. Earth insulation is genuinely competitive with modern materials. Earth has an R value of approximately R1 per inch. 3 feet of earth surrounding your structure is R36. That's not just decent, that's better than most modern wall assemblies. It doesn't compress, it doesn't settle, it doesn't require replacement. It's just there, doing its job indefinitely. Human bodies contribute meaningfully in a well-designed space. A resting human body generates roughly 100 watts of heat, about 340 BTUs per hour. 2 people sleeping in a small, tight, high-mass shelter contribute 680 BTUs per hour through body heat alone. In a leaky, low-mass conventional home, that contribution is irrelevant because the heat escapes faster than bodies can generate it. In Robert's shelter, that contribution was meaningful. It was part of the heat balance. Add a small fire once or twice a day, and the thermal mass takes over for the hours between fires. The feedback loop that makes it self-sustaining. Heat from any source warms the air, which warms the stone, which radiates back into the air when the fire dies down, which keeps the air warm enough that the next fire doesn't have to start from scratch. It's a cycle that reduces fuel consumption dramatically because you're topping up a system that holds its charge, not constantly refilling a bucket with a hole in it. Why did we stop building this way? The honest answer is uncomfortable. If Robert's approach works so much better, why isn't every house built like this? Why did construction move away from principles that kept people genuinely safe during system failures toward designs that are fundamentally fragile? Money and speed, first and foremost. Stone masonry is slow, skilled work. Earth-sheltered construction requires more planning, more land preparation, more labor. Wood frame construction can be done fast, cheap, and at enormous scale. You can build a stick frame house in weeks. Much of a properly stone and earth integrated structure takes months. The construction industry optimized for developer profit and construction speed, not for the long-term thermal resilience of the people who live in the building. That's a blunt truth, but it's the right one. Land economics pushed everything vertical. Underground and earth-integrated structures require more site area for equivalent interior space. In growing cities and suburban sprawl where land became expensive and dense, building up was more economically rational than building into the earth. Thermal efficiency wasn't a consideration that entered the profit calculation. Cultural aesthetics beat thermodynamic performance. People wanted homes that looked impressive. Curb appeal, a nice facade, something that photographed well and made the neighbors envious. But a Quonset hut sitting on a stone foundation doesn't appear in aspirational home magazines. It looks utilitarian. It looks like a person who prioritized function over appearance. which is somehow embarrassing in modern culture, even when it means the difference between freezing and not freezing during a crisis. Cheap energy made efficiency seem unnecessary. This is the big one. When fossil fuels were cheap and abundant, and the grid was considered reliable, why would any builder spend more time and money on thermal mass and earth integration? Just slap up a wood frame, throw in a furnace, and call it done. The heating bill was low enough that nobody cared about the inefficiency. The grid was reliable enough that nobody seriously thought about what happens when it isn't. Efficiency was irrelevant when energy was effectively limitless. That assumption that energy will always be available, that the grid will always be on, that the furnace will always work, is the assumption that kills people when it turns out to be wrong. And it's wrong more often than people want to admit. The skill base eroded. Stone masonry, rammed earth construction, cob building, proper foundation work with thermal mass in mind. These were skilled trades that took years to master. As cheap framing took over, those skills stopped being taught, stopped being practiced, stopped being passed down. Now, most contractors don't know how to build this way even if someone asks them to. The knowledge exists in books and in the practices of a small community of alternative builders. But it's not mainstream. It was abandoned without anyone making a deliberate decision to abandon it. Welcome. If you're still with me, good, this matters. Hit like, leave a comment, subscribe. I want to know, does your home have a basement? Do you use it as living space in winter? Let's talk in the comments. What you can actually do about it. Right now, you're probably not building a Quonset hut. You probably live in a house that already exists, with construction choices that were already made without your input. So what's actually actionable here? Add thermal mass wherever you can. You don't have to rebuild your house. Stone or concrete flooring instead of carpet or thin wood absorbs and holds heat. A brick or stone accent wall does the same. Large containers of water, barrels, tanks, even strategically placed aquariums, painted black to absorb sunlight through windows, store substantial thermal energy. Yes, every pound of mass you add to your home's interior is a small investment in heat retention. It won't transform your house into Robert's shelter overnight, but the principle scales. Use your basement as your primary living space during extreme cold. If you have a basement, it's already partially earth integrated. The temperature in an unheated basement during a winter cold snap will be significantly warmer than the ground floor or upper floors because it's surrounded by earth that's sitting at 50 to 55 degrees. During a real emergency, grid down, heating system failed, moving your sleeping and main living activities to the basement can meaningfully extend how long you can survive without external heat input. Berm your exterior walls. Earth berming means piling soil against the exterior walls of your home, but particularly on the north-facing side. It's low-tech, inexpensive, and adds real insulation. A few feet of soil against the basement wall is R36 insulation that never degrades and never needs replacing. It also looks like intentional landscaping rather than a survivalist modification. If that matters to you, seal every air leak aggressively. Every gap around your windows, doors, electrical outlets, plumbing penetrations is heat bleeding out. Weather stripping, caulk, foam sealant, cheap materials that pay for themselves in the first cold week. In a genuine emergency, plastic sheeting over windows creates a dead air layer that dramatically reduces heat loss. Seal your home like you mean it. Have a backup heat source that doesn't need the grid, a wood stove properly installed, a rocket mass heater if you're building or renovating, with a propane space heater with stored fuel, something that works when the power is out and the gas lines are frozen or shut down. This is the single most impactful thing most people can do for immediate resilience. Not because backup heating replaces good thermal design, it doesn't, but because even a well-designed home needs some heat input in extreme cold, and a single point of failure heating system is an unnecessary risk. The rocket mass heater, modern application of an old principle. While we're talking about backup heating that actually works with physics instead of against it, let's spend a minute on rocket mass heaters because they're the closest modern equivalent to what Robert built. The concept is straightforward. Burn small amounts of wood very efficiently in an insulated combustion chamber, and then route the exhaust gases through a long channel buried in or running through a substantial mass of masonry or cob before venting outside. The exhaust gases, which in a conventional wood stove still carry a lot of heat energy up the chimney, transfer that energy into the surrounding mass. The mass absorbs it and radiates it into the room for hours after the fire has completely died. You fire the thing for an hour or two, the mass charges up. Then you've got 6, 8, 10 hours of gentle radiant warmth with no active fire burning. The fuel consumption compared to a conventional stove is dramatically lower because you're extracting almost all of the available heat energy rather than sending a significant portion up the flue. You can build a basic rocket mass heater for a few $100s in materials. The labor is significant but not technically complex. It's mostly stacking and mortaring. And in a situation where you need to maintain comfortable temperatures in a small space using minimal fuel that you can gather locally, a rocket mass heater is genuinely hard to beat. The principle is identical to what made Robert's stone walls work. You're creating thermal mass that stores heat energy and releases it slowly. You're not heating with a spike, you're heating with a reservoir, a test you should run before you need to. Here's something practical you can do this winter that will tell you more about your home's actual resilience than any energy audit ever will. Pick a cold day, not an extreme cold day, just a normal winter day where the outside temperature is well below comfortable. Turn off your heat completely. Start measuring the interior temperature every hour. How fast does it drop? How cold does it get after 6 hours? After 12? After 24? Most modern homes will drop 20 to 30 degrees in 24 hours without any heat input. Some drop faster depending on construction quality, air leaks, and how much thermal mass is present. A home that starts at 68 degrees and hits 40 degrees in 24 hours has a survivability window of maybe 2 to 3 days before the interior gets genuinely dangerous, depending on how cold it is outside. Robert's shelter, by contrast, lost maybe 5 degrees in a full 24 hours in extreme cold. Because the stone walls were holding energy, the earth was providing stability, and the insulated envelope was preventing rapid loss. That's not a 24-hour survivability window. That's a weeks-long window. Run the test. But to write down the numbers. Then ask yourself honestly, if your heating system failed tomorrow and stayed failed for a week, what happens to you and your household? If the answer is, we'd have to evacuate within 48 hours, you know what you need to work on. The orientation of your home matters more than you think. Here's something most people never consider. The direction your house faces has substantial thermal implications, and most modern homes are oriented for aesthetics, lot constraints, or street alignment rather than solar gain. A south-facing home in the northern hemisphere gets passive solar gain through its windows all day during winter when the sun angle is low. That's free heat hitting your interior surfaces, charging whatever thermal mass you have, reducing the demand on your mechanical heating system. So a north-facing home gets almost none of that. Same house, same insulation values, different orientation, meaningfully different heating load. If you're in a position to influence where a structure gets sited, a new build, an accessory dwelling, a serious renovation, orient your primary glazing to the south. Minimize windows on the north, east, and west where they're primarily heat loss surfaces in winter rather than heat gain surfaces. This is passive solar design, and it's not exotic or complicated. It's just geometry applied to the question of free energy. Robert's Quonset hut benefited from this incidentally because of how the old basement sat on the property. But it's a principle you can apply deliberately. The thermal resilience mindset, building around physics rather than against it. Here's the core shift I want you to make in how you think about your home's relationship with heat. Modern construction assumes you will have continuous energy input. It assumes the grid stays on, the furnace stays running, the fuel keeps flowing. It designs for that assumption. When the assumption holds, it works fine. When the assumption breaks, the whole system fails rapidly because there's no resilience built in. No stored energy, no earth coupling, no thermal mass doing the quiet work of maintaining temperature during gaps in mechanical heating. Robert's approach, even though he didn't frame it in these terms, he was just a carpenter making cheap choices, designed for resilience first. The heat generated by a small wood stove didn't immediately escape. It got stored in the stone, in the warmed earth surrounding the foundation, in the air sealed inside the insulated envelope. It accumulated. It stayed. That's not just a different building technique. It's a different philosophy about what a shelter is supposed to do. Is it supposed to be a container you continuously pump heat into and hope enough stays to keep you alive? Or is it supposed to be a thermal system that stores energy, manages it, and maintains habitability even when inputs are interrupted? The first approach is fragile. The second is resilient. And resilient during a real winter emergency is the difference between staying home and staying comfortable versus loading your family into a car in the dark, in the cold, heading somewhere that probably also doesn't have heat. Seriously, you like this video? Subscribe. Drop a comment. Tell me what backup heating setup you have or what you're planning to build. The more we share this kind of information now, the better off people are when they actually need it. Additional principles worth building around. Beyond thermal mass and earth coupling, a few other design principles deserve mention because they're cheap, they scale, and they compound with everything else we've talked about. Reduce ceiling height in your survival space. Heat rises. A large, high ceiling space requires much more energy to maintain than a smaller, lower ceiling space, and a larger portion of your heat pools near the ceiling where nobody is. If you're in an emergency situation, closing off the upper floors of your home and concentrating your living activity and your backup heat source in a smaller, lower space can dramatically improve how long you can stay warm on limited fuel. Layered window insulation has a bigger payoff than people expect. Windows are the primary radiation heat loss surface in most homes. Double pane windows are better than single pane, but they're still significantly worse than a solid wall. In a cold emergency, covering windows with insulating panels, rigid foam board, heavy blankets hung over the frame, bubble wrap, yes, actually, or plastic sheeting creating a dead air layer, can meaningfully reduce heat loss. You lose the light, but in a survival situation, you prioritize the heat. The power of shared body heat in a small space. This sounds obvious, but people underestimate it. Now, so a family of 4 producing 400 watts of continuous body heat in a well-sealed room of modest size can maintain livable temperatures in moderately cold weather with no other heat source. This is why shelter in place works in emergencies when people huddle together in a small interior room. The physics favor you when you reduce the space and increase the heat producers per square foot. Cooking generates substantial heat. A wood stove or camp stove used for cooking is simultaneously a heat source. A propane camping stove used indoors briefly for cooking with appropriate ventilation awareness produces both the meal and a meaningful heat contribution. Don't waste the heat of cooking. Do it at the time of day when the space temperature is lowest and let the warmth from cooking serve double duty. When Mylar emergency blankets on walls reflect radiant heat back into the room. Sounds extreme. Actually works. Hanging Mylar, those cheap emergency space blankets, on walls opposite your heat source reflects radiant energy back into the room rather than letting it get absorbed into your drywall and dissipate. It's not a substitute for thermal mass, but in an emergency situation with minimal resources, it's cheap and effective. The lesson that's actually worth taking from Robert McNamara. Robert McNamara didn't set out to be anyone's case study. He was a carpenter who wanted to live cheaply, found a deal on a military surplus structure, and happened to have access to an old stone foundation and put them together. By accident or by practical instinct, probably both, he built something that outperformed his neighbor's expensive, proper homes by every metric that matters in a real emergency. He wasn't smarter than modern engineers. He wasn't working from some lost ancient wisdom. He was working from simple physical principles that any high school physics student could understand. Heat moves toward cold. Mass stores energy. Earth is stable. Insulation resists transfer. Build around those facts and you get a shelter that works. Ignore them in favor of speed and appearance and mechanical convenience, and you get a shelter that works right up until it catastrophically doesn't. The next grid failure is not a hypothetical. It has happened, it will happen again, and it will happen in winter, because that's when cold weather stresses the grid most severely and when failure is most dangerous for people without heat. The question isn't whether your home's thermal resilience matters. It's whether you'll improve it before you need it or scramble after you do. Add mass, seal leaks, use your basement, get a backup heat source. Test your home's heat retention now in a controlled way so you know exactly what you're dealing with. Do it this winter because Robert McNamara stayed at 70 degrees while his neighbors burned furniture and froze. He did it with $300, an old stone foundation, and some surplus military hardware. You have access to everything he had, plus 60+ years of additional knowledge about passive thermal design, rocket mass heaters, earth sheltering, and insulation systems. You have no excuse for being the one burning furniture. Physics doesn't negotiate. While it doesn't care about your budget or your aesthetics or your heating system's warranty, it just operates according to its rules. constantly and without exception. Build around those rules and they work for you. Ignore them and they work against you. Robert understood that. Now you do too. Use it. Last call. Like, comment, subscribe. Share this with someone whose house you've been inside and thought, this place is going to be a disaster when the heat goes out. It might be the most useful thing they see this winter. Class